Imagine standing at the helm of a vast army, knowing that every decision you make could mean life or death. The weight of this responsibility is enough to drive even the most seasoned commander to second-guess themselves. Now, imagine having the most critical piece of information delivered to you. Yet, in the chaos of battle, you decide to ignore it. What could go wrong? This is a story of how one commander's failure to heed a messenger's warning led to catastrophic consequences just minutes. La terre de. Throughout history, there have been countless examples of commanders whose decisions, or lack thereof, drastically altered the outcome of battles. Yet, it only takes one moment of negligence, one ignored message to change everything. In this case, the commander had received an urgent message warning him of an approaching enemy force. But in the midst of the pressure, the commander chose to dismiss the messenger's report. He trusted his own judgment, relying on the familiar routine of his forces and the perceived stability of the situation. After all, things seemed fine on the surface, didn't they? As the messenger stood there, attempting to deliver vital intelligence. The commander waved him off, convinced that the situation was under control. Minutes later, enemy forces struck unexpectedly, catching the commander's troops off guard and unprepared. The messenger's words, ignored in that fleeting moment, would have changed everything if only they had been taken seriously. This dramatic moment serves as a stark reminder that the battlefield is not just about strength in numbers or firepower. It's about communication, adaptability, and the ability to listen to the voices that call out from the chaos. The commander's fate, along with that of his army, was sealed the moment he decided to ignore the warning. This tragic oversight costs lives, resources, and the chance to secure victory. But why do commanders so often overlook such crucial intelligence? Is it overconfidence? A failure to recognize the weight of seemingly small details? Or perhaps it is the overwhelming stress of decision-making, where every second counts and mistakes are unforgivable. The truth is, this failure to listen has been the downfall of many throughout history, from ancient battles to modern warfare. The importance of communication cannot be overstated. A failure to respond to intelligence, whether it's a report of troop movements or a warning about the weather, can be the difference between life and death. Let's take a deeper look at how this mistake has played out in history, how ignoring vital information has led to the downfall of commanders, armies, and even entire civilizations. Would you like me to continue developing the next section of the video? Let me know. On the morning of October 25th, 1415, the fields of Agincourt were set for what would become one of the most remarkable victories in military history. The odds were overwhelmingly against the English. They were vastly outnumbered, with their forces roughly one-third the size of the French army. The French had more experienced soldiers, and their heavy cavalry was an intimidating force. Yet, against all logic, it was the English who emerged victorious, and their success came largely from the decisions made long before the first arrow was loosed. But here's the twist. The English victory at Agincourt was in no small part due to a series of messages that were ignored or downplayed by the French commanders. One of the key moments that shifted the course of the battle was a miscommunication about the positioning of the French forces. The French underestimated the tenacity of the English and believed their forces would easily crush them. However, the English knew better, and through their own communication networks, they received vital intelligence that allowed them to adjust their tactics accordingly. The French, on the other hand, failed to properly assess the risks posed by the narrow battlefield and the strategic disadvantage of their position. They dismissed warnings from their scouts and decided to move forward with a frontal assault, which turned out to be disastrous. The English longbowmen, whose arrows could pierce the armor of knights, took full advantage of the situation, raining down arrows upon the French troops. At the same time, the English army had cleverly positioned itself, using the mud and terrain to their advantage. The heavily armored French knights were slowed by the wet ground, and their once formidable charge turned into a disorganized scramble. What was once a devastating force was now a target for the English archers, who methodically picked off the knights and soldiers. The result of this catastrophic miscommunication was the rout of the French forces, with thousands of French soldiers killed and captured, while the English lost fewer than 500 men. It was a stunning upset, one that could be attributed not just to superior tactics, but also to the crucial role that intelligence and communication played in ensuring that the English commanders made the right decisions at the right time. The lesson of Agincourt is clear. The failure to heed important messages, whether it's the position of an enemy, the state of your own forces, or the terrain you heave fighting on, can have dire consequences. And yet, throughout history, many commanders have made the same mistake, whether due to overconfidence, arrogance, or simple human error. The refusal to listen to critical intelligence has led to the downfall of many. This battle serves as a reminder that communication and the willingness to adapt are often the deciding factors. In military success, it's not just about having the largest army or the most powerful weapons, but about how effectively you use the information available to you. In the realm of ancient history, the fall of Troy is one of the most infamous examples of how ignoring crucial intelligence can lead to an downfall. The great city of Troy, renowned for its impenetrable walls and heroic defenders, stood proud for 10 long years against the besieging Greek army. For a decade, the Trojans resisted every assault, confident that their city could withstand anything the Greeks threw at them. But what ultimately led to their destruction wasn't a brute force attack, but a message that should have signaled the city's imminent fall. The story of Troy's downfall hinges on one of the most well-known deceptions in history: the Trojan horse. After 10 years of futile siege, the Greeks presented a supposed gift to the Trojans, an enormous wooden horse. The Greeks left the horse outside the gates of Troy as a supposed offering to the gods, meant to ensure safe passage home. The Trojans, believing the siege was finally over, brought the horse inside their city walls as a symbol of victory. But what they failed to realize was that the Greeks had hidden a small force of soldiers inside the horse. These soldiers would emerge at nightfall and open the gates of Troy to the rest of the Greek army, who had secretly sailed back under the cover of darkness. This intelligence disguised as a gift was crucial, yet the Trojans failed to see the warning signs. They ignored the possibility that the Greeks could be using psychological warfare, lulling them into a false sense of security. The fall of Troy is a striking example of how a lack of vigilance and an underestimation of the enemy's tactics led to catastrophic consequences. The Trojans had received numerous warnings during the course of the war. A prophet had predicted their fall. The Greeks had attempted various other deceptions, and there had been signs that the Greeks were not merely but instead setting up for one final deadly strike. Yet these reports were either dismissed or misinterpreted, leaving the Trojans vulnerable to a clever deception they never saw coming. Had the Trojans acted on the intelligence they had received, whether by questioning the true nature of the horse or by maintaining their guard, their fate might have been entirely different. Instead, they embraced the idea that the war was over and let their guard down. This tragic misstep led to the destruction of their city, the death of their heroes, and the end of their civilization. The lesson of Troy is timeless. The failure to interpret and act on critical intelligence can result in the collapse of even the most powerful civilizations. It serves as a stark reminder that in both war and life, it's essential to remain vigilant, question assumptions, and recognize that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones that appear to be the least threatening. June 6, 1944, was a pivotal day in World War II, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The Allies' invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day, would go down in history as one of the most audacious and meticulously planned military operations. Yet, despite the overwhelming scale of the operation, the success of D-Day hinged on a single, seemingly simple factor: the successful deception of the German command. In the months leading up to the invasion, Allied forces went to extraordinary lengths to deceive the Germans into believing the landing would take place at a completely different location. The Allies needed to convince the Germans that the main attack would occur at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, rather than the actual landing sites in Normandy. This misinformation campaign was vital, as the Germans had concentrated their forces around Pas-de-Calais, expecting the invasion there. One of the most ingenious aspects of the deception involved the use of false messages and double agents. The Allies had recruited agents to send fabricated information to the Germans, using everything from fake radio transmissions to misleading movements of troops and equipment. One of the most crucial elements of this deception was the creation of an entire phantom army led by General George Patton. This army was stationed in southeast England, supposedly ready to invade Patton. The Germans, unaware that this was a ruse, diverted critical resources to defend that area, leaving Normandy relatively underdefended. But the deception didn't stop there. The Allies also employed a variety of physical tricks to deceive the Germans, including inflatable tanks, dummy landing crafts, and fake traffic to suggest troop movements that never actually occurred. They even went as far as to use misleading weather reports to make the Germans believe the invasion was not imminent. As D-Day unfolded, the German response was slower than it should have been. Due to the successful misinformation campaign, the Germans were caught off guard by the actual landings in Normandy. They had delayed their reinforcements at Pas-de-Calais, believing that the Normandy landings were a diversion. In the critical hours after the invasion, this hesitation allowed the Allies to gain a foothold in France, leading to the eventual liberation of Western Europe. What makes the D-Day deception so remarkable is the way it relied on the manipulation of communication and intelligence. It wasn't just about outsmarting the enemy on the battlefield. It was about controlling the flow of information, convincing the Germans to make decisions based on false assumptions. In essence, it was a battle of minds as much as it was a battle of armies. The outcome of D-Day, one of the most successful amphibious invasions in history, was determined not just by the courage and tenacity of the soldiers who stormed the beaches, but by the information warfare that took place in the weeks leading up to it. The success of this deception serves as a powerful reminder of the critical role intelligence plays in warfare. The ability to manipulate the enemy's perception can be just as decisive as brute force. And one day, flow of information is controlled effectively. It can turn the tide of battle before a single shot is even fired. The morning of December 7th, 1941 was like any other at Pearl Harbor, until the skies above the Hawaiian Islands were filled with the roar of incoming Japanese bombers. The attack on Pearl Harbor would go down in history as one of the most devastating and unexpected strikes ever launched on American soil. What makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking is that it didn't have to happen. Vital intelligence had been gathered, warnings had been issued, and yet the attack still caught the United States by surprise. How did this happen? How could the world's most powerful military be caught off guard by an attack that, in hindsight, seemed all but inevitable? The failure at Pearl Harbor is often attributed to a single mistake: the ignoring of intelligence reports that could have warned of the imminent threat. 4 months before the attack, American intelligence had been tracking Japanese military movements in the Pacific. The United States had intercepted communications, noticed the buildup of Japanese forces, and even predicted that Japan might strike into the Pacific. Yet, the commanders in Hawaii dismissed these reports, either underestimating the danger or believing that the Japanese would strike elsewhere in the Philippines or Southeast Asia, rather than on American soil itself. In the weeks leading up to the attack, there were numerous signs that something was wrong. On the morning of December 7th, a critical warning was received by the American military. A Japanese submarine was spotted near the entrance to Pearl Harbor. A few hours later, radar operators detected unusual activity in the skies. However, in both cases, these warnings were either misunderstood, downplayed, or outright ignored. The radar operators who saw the approaching Japanese aircraft were told that it was likely just a group of American bombers arriving from the mainland. The submarine sighting was similarly dismissed as a non-threat, but the most shocking part of the Pearl Harbor story is how the attack unfolded in plain sight. The Japanese had prepared meticulously for the assault. They launched their strike in waves, starting with a bombing raid on the naval base, followed by devastating attacks on American battleships, aircraft, and other vital infrastructure. In just over 2 hours, the Japanese had crippled much of the Pacific Fleet, killed over 2,400 Americans, and brought the United States into World War II. Yet, at the moment of the attack, American leaders were still reeling from the realization that the warnings they had received, warnings that they had failed to act upon, had been too accurate for comfort. This catastrophe could have been avoided had those in charge taken the intelligence seriously. The most devastating aspect of the Pearl Harbor attack is that it wasn't a sudden surprise. It was a failure to act on what was already known. It was the result of complacency, arrogance, and a belief that the United States was invulnerable to such an attack. The tragedy of Pearl Harbor served as a brutal lesson in the importance of heeding warnings and taking action based on available intelligence. The attack on Pearl Harbor remains a symbol of the dangers of underestimating the enemy and failing to act on vital information. It's a stark reminder that the most devastating events in history often occur not due to a lack of information, but because that information is dismissed or ignored. In warfare, intelligence is not just an advantage, it's the lifeline that can determine the fate of nations. The failure at Pearl Harbor taught the United States and the world a hard lesson that would not be soon forgotten. On the morning of June 18, 1815, the fields near the Belgian town of Waterloo were set for a battle that would decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte, the great French emperor, was poised to crush the Allied forces under the command of the Duke of Wellington. But as the hours passed and the battle began to unfold, a critical delay in orders would have profound consequences. Napoleon, who had been at the height of his power, was facing an Allied force that was divided but still formidable. Wellington's troops, composed mostly of British, Dutch, Belgian, and German soldiers, were holding their ground against the French. However, the French were more numerous, and Napoleon had every reason to believe that victory was within his grasp. Yet, the key to his success lay in one factor: the timing of his forces' coordination. The problem, however, was a delay in Napoleon's orders. One of his generals, Grouchy, had been sent to chase down the retreating Prussian forces, who were a potential threat. Napoleon, confident that Wellington's forces would soon collapse under the pressure of his assault, delayed sending the crucial orders to Grouchy to return and support the main attack. The delay came at a critical time. By the time Grouchy finally received his orders and made his way back to the battlefield, it was too late. The Prussians, under the command of General Blücher, had already turned the tide of the battle. The arrival of the Prussian reinforcements was a decisive moment in the Battle of Waterloo. With the additional forces, Wellington was able to rally his troops and launch a final, successful counterattack against the French. Napoleon, despite his genius in the battlefield, was left helpless as his army, once full of hope and momentum, was rooted. The victory that seemed inevitable just hours before had been stolen from his grasp by a failure in communication, a delay in issuing orders. The delay in sending the critical orders to Grouchy is often cited as one of the most significant strategic mistakes made by Napoleon in his final campaign. This mistake not only cost him the battle, but it also led to his eventual abdication and exile to the island of St. Helena, where he spent the remainder of his life. The Battle of Waterloo marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and Napoleon's defeat changed the course of European history. This episode in military history serves as a sobering reminder that even the most powerful leaders can be brought low by the smallest of mistakes. A failure to act swiftly or a delay in decision-making can be the difference between victory and defeat. Napoleon, despite his brilliance, was undone by a moment of hesitation, hesitation that left the door open for Wellington and Blücher to seize the opportunity and deliver the final blow. The Battle of Waterloo stands as a powerful testament to the importance of decisive leadership and the need for commanders to act quickly and decisively in the face of rapidly changing circumstances. In war, hesitation can be as deadly as any weapon, and the cost of delay can be immeasurable. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, was one of the most decisive naval battles of World War II. It wasn't just a clash of fleets. It was a turning point that shifted the balance of power in the Pacific in favor of the Allies. What makes Midway particularly fascinating is the way in which the battle was won not by superior firepower or sheer numbers, but through intelligence, surprise, and the ability to outsmart the enemy. At the heart of the victory was the ability of American intelligence officers to decipher Japanese codes and uncover the Japanese Navy's plans. In the months leading up to the battle, the United States had broken the Japanese naval code, allowing them to intercept critical communications. This intelligence gave the American forces a clear understanding of the Japanese strategy. They were planning a massive attack on Midway Atoll, hoping to lure the remaining American aircraft carriers into a trap and destroy them. However, what happened next was nothing short of remarkable. While the Japanese were confident of their success, believing the element of surprise is on their side, the Americans had already anticipated their every move. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, American bombers, armed with torpedoes, attacked the Japanese carriers at precisely the right moment. Despite initial setbacks, the American pilots managed to inflict devastating damage to the Japanese fleet. The key was that the Japanese had not anticipated such a rapid response, nor had they foreseen the devastating impact of their own carrier-based aircraft being caught off guard while refueling or What truly set Midway apart, however, wasn't just the skill of the American pilot. It was the element of unpredictability that played such a crucial role. The Japanese, who had expected an easy victory, were blindsided by the speed and precision with which the Americans acted. They had assumed the advantage in the air, but the Americans, with their intelligence advantage, turned the tide of battle almost overnight. The result was a stunning victory for the United States, with 4 Japanese aircraft carriers sunk and their naval superiority in the Pacific shattered. The loss of these carriers was a blow from which the Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The Battle of Midway marked the beginning of a series of successful Allied offensives in the Pacific, ultimately leading to Japan's defeat in 1945. The Battle of Midway serves as an enduring example of how unpredictable elements and intelligence can turn the tide of war. The Japanese had superior numbers, better trained pilots, and a seemingly superior position. But the ability of the American forces to predict and counter their every move shattered the Japanese hopes of victory. In the end, it was not just military might, but foresight, strategy, and the ability to adapt to the unpredictable that won the battle. Midway is often remembered as one of the greatest victories of World War II, not just because of the immediate impact on the Japanese fleet, but because it demonstrated that the true key to victory lies in the ability to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy. A single mistake, a misjudgment in timing, and the course of a war can be changed forever. History is filled with tales of heroic battles, daring military strategies, and devastating defeats. Yet, one of the most tragic and often overlooked stories is the tale of an army that was sacrificed due to a critical miscommunication on army that could have changed the course of a war if only the right messages had been sent at the right time. This is the story of the Battle of the Khyber Pass in 1842, during the First Anglo-Afghan War. In the midst of British military campaigns in India, the British East India Company sought to maintain control over Afghanistan, originating as a crucial buffer against Russian expansion. In 1839, the British invaded Afghanistan and installed a puppet king, Shah Shuja. However, the occupation was highly unpopular with the Afghan people, and soon a rebellion erupted, leading to the British retreat from Kabul in 1842. The British Army, under the command of General William Elphinstone, was tasked with evacuating Kabul and retreating to India. The army, composed of around 16,500 soldiers, including soldiers, civilians, and camp followers, embarked on what would become one of the most infamous retreats in military history. As they marched out of Kabul through the Khyber Pass, they were harassed by Afghan tribesmen who ambushed the British columns with deadly force. The critical moment of this disaster was a miscommunication between Elphinstone and his commanders. The British officers believed that they had secured a safe route through the Khyber Pass, but this was based on outdated intelligence. The Afghan tribesmen had been organizing for weeks, knowing full well that the British would pass through this narrow, vulnerable pass. The British underestimated their adversaries and, more importantly, failed to act upon the vital information they received that the path ahead was swarming with Afghan fighters. Elphinstone, instead of taking decisive action and reordering his troops, relied on outdated reports and maintained his position despite growing dangers. His delay in making the decision to fortify his position or retreat into a more defensible area led to disastrous results. As the British forces advanced deeper into the pass, they found themselves increasingly surrounded, unable to communicate effectively or coordinate their efforts with the rear guard. The army was ambushed from all sides. The retreat quickly turned into a massacre, with only one small group of survivors eventually making it to safety. The rest of the force, including the majority of the British soldiers and their civilian camp followers, were slaughtered. The death toll was catastrophic, with over 16,000 soldiers and civilians lost. making this one of the worst disasters in British military history. The failure to properly assess and act on the intelligence available, coupled with a lack of decisive leadership in a moment of crisis, resulted in a tragedy that could have been avoided had the British forces reacted to the warnings with a sense of urgency, or at least coordinated their actions with the local Afghan tribes who are loyal to the British. The entire outcome of the retreat could have been different. The miscommunication between Elphinstone and his officers and the reluctance to act on the intelligence at hand not only cost the British Army an entire division, but also led to a massive loss of reputation and morale for the British Empire in the region. The aftermath of the disaster saw a shift in British tactics, as they learned a painful lesson about the importance of communication and adaptability in times of war. The Battle of the Khyber Pass remains a powerful reminder of how miscommunication, failure to act on available intelligence, and delayed decisions can result in catastrophic outcomes. Etc. Atali of how failure to heed warnings, whether from trusted allies or the environment itself, can alter the course of history. And while the story of this defeat has been overshadowed by other events of the time, it continues to serve as a cautionary tale for military commanders today. The Roman Empire, one of the most formidable and enduring empires in history, was no stranger to military triumphs. However, even the Romans, with their unmatched military strategies and disciplined legions, were not immune to the devastating effects of complacency and miscommunication. Throughout the centuries, there were moments when Rome's military prowess faltered not because of inferior tactics or insufficient numbers, but because vital intelligence was ignored, orders were misunderstood, or commanders failed to act decisively at critical junctures. One of the most prominent examples of this comes from the infamous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 098, where 3 Roman legions, under the command of Publius Quinctilius Verus, were destroyed by an alliance of Germanic tribes. The defeat was not only a massive loss of around 20,000 Roman soldiers perished, but it also marked a turning point in Rome's expansion into Germany. The defeat stunned the Roman world, and it was largely attributed to a series of intelligence failures, poor decision-making, and a grave underestimation of the enemy. Varus, who was in command of the Roman forces, had received intelligence that the Germanic tribes were fragmented and could be easily subjugated. However, the reality was quite different. The tribes had been rallying under the leadership of Arminius, a former Roman auxiliary officer who knew Roman tactics well and had turned against his former masters. Arminius' knowledge of Roman military strategies and the terrain gave him a significant advantage. Despite receiving warnings from local tribesmen and his own scouts about a growing threat in the area, Verus dismissed the reports and assumed that the Germans were too disorganized to pose a serious challenge. This complacency, combined with miscommunication, led to the Romans being drawn into a carefully laid trap. The Germanic tribes, using the dense Teutoburg forest to their advantage, ambushed the Romans with devastating effectiveness. The Roman legions, accustomed to open battlefields, were unable to maneuver effectively in the forest, and they were quickly overwhelmed. Varus, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, ultimately committed suicide, leaving his forces to face total annihilation. The loss at the Teutoburg forest had long-lasting consequences for Rome. It halted their expansion into Germania and forced the Romans to adopt a more defensive posture along the Rhine River. But more than the tactical loss, the battle served as a brutal reminder of how a commander's failure to listen to warnings or to act on critical intelligence can lead to disastrous results. Had Verus been more attentive to the warnings, more skeptical of the intelligence he received, or more willing to trust his instincts, the outcome might have been entirely different. But this wasn't an isolated incident. In fact, the Roman Empire's history is dotted with examples of how a failure to communicate effectively led to the downfall of key battles. Whether it was a delayed response to an enemy threat, misinterpretations of intelligence reports, or the complacency that came with overconfidence, the result was often the same. Rome lost crucial battles that, in hindsight, could have been won. Perhaps the most telling lesson from the Roman experience is the importance of leadership, communication, and adaptability. Even the most disciplined armies, like the Roman legions, can falter when their leaders fail to listen, fail to adapt, or fail to act swiftly based on the intelligence at hand. The Romans, despite their might, learned this lesson the hard way through defeat, bloodshed, and the loss of an empire's momentum. The end. The Roman Empire's rise and fall are a testament to the complexities of military strategy. The greatest empires in history did not fall solely due to external enemies or overwhelming forces. Often, they crumbled under the weight of their own internal failings, the most damaging of which was the failure to heed crucial intelligence. This remains a powerful lesson for any military leader. Complacency and miscommunication can be just as destructive as any enemy force. As we've seen throughout history, from the ancient world to modern warfare, the ability to listen, adapt, and respond to critical intelligence has often been the deciding factor between victory and defeat. Whether it's the underestimation of an enemy's strength, a delayed order, or ignoring vital warnings, the failure to communicate effectively has cost leaders, their armies, their careers, and sometimes even entire civilizations. But what is it that makes communication in warfare so important, and why does it remain a cornerstone of military success today? From the Battle of Troy to the Battle of Midway, we've explored how intelligence, whether gathered through spies, messengers, or intercepted communications, has shaped the course of history. But in each of these cases, the true power wasn't just in the information itself. It was in the ability to act on that information. The commanders who succeeded were the ones who listened, processed the data, and adapted their strategies accordingly. On the flip side, those who failed were often the ones who dismissed the messages, ignored the warnings, or underestimated the threat they faced. This lesson is just as relevant today as it was in the past. In modern warfare, the battlefields are no longer confined to open fields or dense forests. They extend into the digital realm, where information flows faster than ever. The same principles apply. Commanders must be able to process information quickly, adapt to changing circumstances, and, most importantly, communicate effectively with their forces. A delayed message or misinterpreted intelligence in today's world could be the difference between winning and losing a war. But it's not just the military world where this lesson holds weight. In every aspect of life, the ability to listen, communicate clearly, and adapt to new information can determine success or failure. Whether in business, politics, or personal relationships, the principles of communication and responsiveness are crucial. History has shown us time and again that failing to act on critical information, whether through miscommunication or inaction, can lead to irreparable damage. The story of military communication is, at its core, a story of leadership. The greatest leaders are those who recognize the value of information, who trust their messengers, and who make decisions based on the collective knowledge of their team. These are the leaders who are not afraid to listen, who understand that no one person has all the answers, and who are always willing to adapt to new circumstances. As we reflect on these stories of battles lost, of leaders undone by their own failures, we must also recognize that there is an opportunity in every message, every piece of intelligence, and every warning. The key to victory, whether on the battlefield or in life, is in how we respond to the information we receive. Do we listen? Do we adapt? Do we act in time? The battles of the past may have been fought with swords, arrows, and guns, but the lessons they offer are timeless. The power of communication, the ability to understand and act on intelligence, is a skill that transcends time, and it's one that can still change the course of history today. Thank you for staying with me through this exploration of history's most pivotal moments. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What battle, moment, or leader do you think had the most profound impact due to their ability or inability to communicate effectively? Let's continue the conversation.